Hello and welcome back to From the Yarra River to the Mediterranean Sea. My name is Hannah and I'm joining you from Melbourne, also known as Nam in Australia.
And my name is Ittay and I'm joining you from Jerusalem, also known as Yerushalayim and Al-Quds.
Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I'm recording this podcast on unceded Wurundjeri land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Hello Ittay, it's been a while.
It has been a long time, Hannah. Why has it been so long since we've been in your ears, dear listeners? What's happened?
Yes, a lot has happened. Unfortunately, we actually did record the final episode twice and we lost the recording. We had lots of technical difficulties for some reason with this episode, and then life got busy and we didn't end up going forward with it, so we're sorry, but we did want to come back. We didn't want to leave you in the lurch, so we did want to come back with a final episode. It's not exactly as we planned, but we hope that you still enjoy it and we can say bye properly. So we thought we would just start by acknowledging that it's almost a year since October 7th. We're recording on the 26th of September 2024, and it's been a big year. It's kind of a weird milestone to acknowledge because I feel like things are just so much worse than they were a year ago. It was terrible a year ago and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. How would you describe how you're feeling right now?
Yeah, it's I know this should be a stronger word, but the first word that comes to my mind as we approach the 1 year anniversary is just disappointment. Like there's so many things in the past year that could have been different that weren't. I have a lot to say about Jerusalem, but I know that our war here has been felt all over the world. So can you maybe just share your experience over the last year in Melbourne?
Well, obviously at the beginning, as you and the listeners know, I became really obsessed with what was going on in Israel and in Australia after October 7th. That's what led to the creation of this podcast. I was reading everything I could. I was engaging on Instagram. I was doing this podcast. I was engaging in the emails that we received. I was talking to anyone and everyone about this for months and months on end. And probably around the time when we decided to end the podcast, I just really disengaged in a lot of it. I felt exhausted. I felt also really disappointed. I felt like even though this podcast had created a like-minded community for me, I felt like I was still so alone for a lot of the time. I felt like, and stopping the podcast, I kind of fell back into that again. I didn't have that community around me. I wasn't talking to you as much because we were just both really busy. And I just felt like I needed a break, which is kind of a weird thing to say. And I feel really lucky that I can just switch off, that I'm not, having bombs into my home. There's no, I'm safe here. And I felt very lucky to be able to just say, you know what, I need to just look after myself and kind of not engage for a bit. So yeah. I feel a bit out of the loop. I live in Abbotsford, so I'm not in the, center of the Jewish community here in Melbourne. I am able to just be separate from it, which has been nice and also very isolating as well. Since the end of doing this podcast, I hardly talk about this topic with any Jews unless I feel like we're on the same page, which is really sad, I think. Like that communication, the communication that we've been saying that we should try and do on the podcast, I've stopped doing that.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot, when you say that about, our episode with Elika where she talked about having strong opinions weakly held. And I feel like in the last year, everyone that's got strong opinions strongly held. And yeah, very few people. I also felt in the beginning of the war, I was able to talk a lot to people that I disagreed with. And it still happens now occasionally, but it's much more rare. I think people are very entrenched in whatever view they have of this horror, and then they stick to that narrative very firmly.
Yeah, Yeah. And I mean, I've noticed it even in the very few conversations that I've had with people. I'm not being as open as I once was, especially when we were doing this podcast. I was probably much more open to hearing people out and having empathy for people. And I think like the longer this war goes on, the more I just feel like, I mean, this is just my view. I'm like, how can anyone really still be saying this is the right thing to be doing? And anyone who kind of defends the IDF right now or Israel, and that's not to say that I'm just talking about this war, what they're doing in Gaza and now Lebanon. Anyone who is, I mean, people will be saying, it's complicated and it's nuanced, and it is. I know it is, but I'm really struggling at the moment with the strong opinions, and in turn, it's making my opinions even stronger. And yeah, we need to start doing this podcast again, probably, even though we're not. But
yeah.
I think it will help. I think
from
it
the
will
river
help.
to the, there was a protest the other week, and someone held up a sign that said, "From the river to the sea, we all need therapy." And it's one of the best slogans I've seen, because there's so much trauma that we all carry, whether you live here or you live on the other side of the world. Just like the amount of graphic footage we see and consume all the time, and then for me that I live as well, is it's like it's a real burden on your soul.
I think one of the things we did speak about this in our last episode that never got published, but something that I've been really thinking about is my Jewishness and how it relates or doesn't relate to Israel. And I don't really want to go into it now. I think it's not the point of this episode, but I've really been focusing on how do I want to be Jewish, and what does my Jewishness mean without this connection to Israel, because I can feel that really going away, my connection, my desire for the longer this goes on, I'm like, I just go back to a land for all. That is really if you're new to this, if you're just hearing this, go back and listen to, I think it's episode 7 where Ittay talks about a land for all. I think that is the only way. I just think that is the only way that peace will ever happen. And I feel like we're so far away from that. And so because of that, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I just don't know how to get there. That's what I think we need. But no one else thinks that from both sides. No one thinks that that's ever going to happen, that it's this naive thing. And so it's exhausting I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you continue to educate about it when no one wants it.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And I'll start by saying that in addition to disappointment, I think since October 7th, there's been so many people close to me that have lost loved ones. I'm friends with people their children have been IDF soldiers that have been killed. I know many Palestinians had loved ones killed in Gaza, people displaced from their homes for months. I think of all the deaths in Gaza, probably one that hit me the hardest was the killing of Hersh Goldberg Poland, who was killed in a tunnel by Hamas on the 1st of September. His face appears everywhere in my neighborhood. He grew up not far from where I live. Carm, my wife, worked with his parents, his mother, Rachel. And I think, I don't know why, they're such an incredible family. And I think the way they advocated for their son, always centering, his right to be free, but also the right of Palestinians to be safe, and saying that in every speech from the DNC convention to, in front of the UN, always acknowledging, the Palestinian mothers who are also shedding tears, was incredible. And I just felt like their son deserves to be free. Like something needs to be happening that will make him end this war alive. And at one point Rachel read a poem called To the Boys in the Room, and it was on day 184 of the war. And in the poem she's writing to the boys in the room, meaning the men negotiating in Doha and Qatar about the hostage deal, who are representatives of both Israel and Hamas and Egypt and the US. And she says to the boys in the room, what are you doing? Like, it's been 184 days. And actually, I want to read the poem I'm going to read it because I think I wasn't meaning to do this, but I actually think it's really powerful. So I'm going to read it. So on day 184 of the war, Rachel Goldberg Poland read out this poem in front of the United Nations, and it says, "To the boys in the room, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent civilians suffering terribly in Gaza, but I only know one of them. He and I share the same DNA, and we are both left-handed. Oh, now only one of us is left-handed. And he lived and grew inside of me for 9 months, many moons ago. To the boys in the room, every folktale begins with the 4 words, once upon a time, and every deal or negotiation you craft should begin with 1 word, hostages. To the boys in the room, to motivate and incentivize you, you will now be asked to hand over one of your family members, your spouse, your father, your sister, your son, your brother, your daughter, your mother, your grandmother. If it has already passed on to the next world, we will supply you with a shovel. We will hold on to your beloved one and treat them as our beloved ones have been treated until you come back with a plan to get these people out. And I reckon it will take you less than 184 days. To the boys in the room, our Father who art in heaven, call him by any name you wish. He'll be home soon. And boys, just wait till your father gets home." And every time I think of that poem and the boys in the room who were meant to negotiate to end this war and to do a deal to bring the hostages home and end the destruction of Gaza, and I think of the way they failed, and I often imagine, what if instead of there being just those boys in the room, Rachel Goldberg Poland and a mother from Gaza were the ones leading the negotiations? What if the whole room were women? What if the whole room were bereaved families? I reckon they would have come up with a solution that wouldn't have taken a year. And instead, we're in a situation where there's a menu before us, and the menu only has war. Like, peace isn't on the menu. It's not an option. People like me and many others in the peace camp, Aziz, Maoz, people that we've had on this podcast before, who try and imagine a different way to share this land, to end the suffering, to hold people accountable who've committed war crimes. Where are those voices? Are not in the mainstream, and I desperately miss them. I'm glad I have them in my life, and I think one of the reasons I keep centering the humanity of Palestinians and the humanity of Israelis is because I'm in those communities that are still doing that, and I live that in my life here in Jerusalem. But if I didn't, the pit of despair is very wide, and there's room for a lot of people in it, and I'm trying to stay out of it.
Why do you think that they haven't been able to do it, to end this war and bring the hostages home and stop the horrific bombing in Gaza, and now not only have they not stopped it, but now they've started a new war? Why do you think, what do you think is happening?
I think there's a lot of fear. A lot of Israelis fear that if Israel stops the war in Gaza with Hamas, even though it's almost completely destroyed, but Hamas still has a very, very small ability to fire rockets into Israel. And Hezbollah obviously has a lot of ability to fire rockets into Israel. So Israel feels like if it stops, well, the Prime Minister of Israel at least feels like if Israel stops the military operations in Gaza and against Hezbollah, that Israel will be destroyed and there'll be no safety. And I think in Gaza they feel like if they stop fighting against Israel will permanently occupy the Gaza Strip and build settlements there and essentially remove as many people as possible down to a tiny little corner of Deir al-Balach and eventually make Gaza Israel. And Hezbollah feel like, they claim to be firing these rockets into Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, and they feel like if they stop that, they're giving a permission to Israel to continue further annexation. And so I think all three parties here feel like they don't trust the other side. Any agreement is based on, you don't sign an agreement, this as a family lawyer, with someone who you don't believe will keep their side of an agreement. Now, in family law, you have the law, you have police, you have sort of some sort of mediator that when there's an agreement, they have to ensure that, the agreement that's signed by the courts is actually followed on here. But here, the mediator, which is the international community, or some people say even the United States, has not been able to enforce an agreement on the parties, and so we remain in our fear, in our desire to do that. And I think we're all on ladders as well. We're on very, very high ladders, and no one is holding a hand to help us climb down from those ladders. And so then, you repeat what you did in the past, thinking that you're going to get a different outcome. And to me, that's like insanity. Israel's had several wars with Lebanon already, and none of them have ended well. So to me, I find it horrifying. But a lot of people saying, well, what's the choice? I was like, there's so many other choices. There's so many other things you can do to bring safety and security. Firstly, make a deal in Gaza. Like, it's such an obvious thing. Like, we know the terms. We know, there's a deal on the table that Gershon Baskin has negotiated that would, in 3 weeks, bring out all the hostages and end the Israeli occupation of Gaza. Like, and it's something Hamas have agreed to. Like, do it. Like, there'll be other wars to fight in the future, I'm sure, but like, there's a deal on the table now that can save these lives. The majority of Israelis actually support this deal. There's protests every Saturday night with hundreds of thousands of people saying they want this deal. Whilst there's very little polling in Gaza, I'm sure the majority of Gazans also want a deal to end the war, because they're desperate to feel safety and security, and like have the right to move and access to food and supplies and hospitals and the urgent medical care that they need. And so I think there's a difference here between wanting a win-lose situation, which is I think what all the sides want. We win, the other side loses, and a win-win, which is where I win but you also win, and a deal is a win-win. It's a win for Palestinians who their prisoners will be released from Israeli jails. It's a win for Israelis that the hostages will come home. But politically, it's a disaster because politically, Netanyahu doesn't want pictures of thousands of Palestinians rejoicing that the war is over and their prisoners are freed from Israeli jails. And so you end up stuck in this win-lose scenario where it's ultimately, there's no win-lose, it's actually just lose-lose.
I just want to quickly say something about the family law analogy, because every day I work with people in really high conflict cases, and when they're in the middle of it and fighting in court, there is, they both people think terrible things about the other person, and they think like, no, I'm not giving up this point because then this will happen and this will happen. And sometimes they go all the way to trial, or sometimes we go to a mediation, and both parties are in separate rooms and there's a mediator, and both parties often start with parts where they're just like, I'm not giving this up, and the other person says, I'm not giving this up, and then eventually after hours it will come to a deal, and both people think that the other person won't uphold it. So, there's some clauses like non-denigration, like, that you can't denigrate the other person in front of the children. And, those orders are incredibly hard to enforce because you can't bring it because the other person will say, no, I didn't. And so the person will say, oh, well, what's the point of doing this? What's the point of even getting to this deal if I don't trust the other person? And then often they sign it and they don't trust the other, but it's over. It's out of the court system, and they actually do move on with their lives, and they don't worry about whether the other parent is denigrating the other, because all of a sudden, once they're out of court and the conflict has died down and the tension is no longer there, they just move on, and they think that what was going to be the biggest thing in the world, once they're not fighting anymore, it just dies down. And obviously it's completely different to countries, but I think people's worst fears are they're made worse once they're in conflict. And once they stop, fears are able to retreat, because you realize that both people actually don't want to be in this conflict. Most
Right.
people, I think we've said this on almost every episode, that people just want to live. They just want to go about their day-to-day lives and they don't actually want to be killing anyone. But both sides think that the other wants to obliterate them. But I wonder what would happen if we just got a deal and you just trust the other, even if you don't trust them, you just try it. You just say, you know what, let's just try it. And I wonder what would happen.
Look, this is why a lot of mediators, even now between Israel and Lebanon, as we're recording, there's a discussion of a 3-week ceasefire. A 3-week ceasefire doesn't solve everything, but I think a 3-week ceasefire is so powerful because it kind of says, just for 3 weeks, everyone stops firing, and then let's see what we can do. And then once you take out that sense of constant rocket sirens over Israel and bombings of southern Lebanon, it just begins to open a window for something else. And so, and Israel's also had in this war a few temporary ceasefires with Hamas. Unfortunately, they haven't held. But in one of those temporary ceasefires, 105 hostages and 320 Palestinian prisoners were released. So sometimes those ceasefires do bear fruit. And I think that's if you can't go for a long ceasefire, at least try for a short one, and then give space for alternative creative ideas to come to the negotiating table.
Well, we're still talking about things that we were talking about in episode 1, and we're still here, which is why I'm just, disengaging, and glad that you are still doing the work. And speaking of doing the work, I want to tell the listeners some exciting news that you have written a book.
Yes. In addition to all the things I've done in my life, I've written a book over the past year called The Holy and the Broken. It's going to be published with HarperCollins next year. It's coming out on January the 15th. And I actually want to thank a listener who helped make the book a reality. So as you know, getting a book published in Australia is not an easy thing, especially if you're a first-time author and especially if you're not famous or a member of the royal family. I feel like that often helps when you get books published, and I'm not famous and I did not marry anyone in the royal family, which I'm very grateful for. And so when I sent my book to the various big publishers in Australia, obviously no one wrote back to me. And then one of our listeners, actually in Perth of all places, one of our listeners from there, Tess Woods, heard this podcast and wrote us a beautiful email. And Perth calls herself Egyptian raised with the blood of her Palestinian ancestors running through her veins. And she wrote us an email at fromtheyarra@gmail.com and talked about how she appreciated what the conversation that we were having. And I sent her a chapter of my book to read because I know that she herself is a very successful author with both Penguin and HarperCollins. And then she passed on the manuscript to HarperCollins. And long story short, they said yes. And so that's how the book came about. But I think there's something for me really special about, at a time when it's so hard to be published, that as a Jewish author, that an Arab author on the other side of the world helped me connect me to a publisher, and the book is really all about how Jewish and Arab people can share this land and live in a different way. And so I think the fact that the book came about through that is highly symbolic and relevant to what the book is about.
Well, I'm very excited for it to come out. I just want to say one more thing about Tess. She recently launched a book and had a book launch in Melbourne, and I met her in person. And she's just the loveliest, most enthusiastic, loving person I think I've ever met. And that was probably the best thing to come out of this podcast, I think.
Yeah, and Tessa's new book, by the way, is called The Venice Hotel. It's about what happens when the lives of 4 different women become entangled in a boutique Venice hotel. Dark secrets unravel, and not everyone who checked out into the hotel will check out again. I haven't yet read it, but we think you should check it out.
Ittay, just a few more questions about your book. You're probably one of the busiest people I know. You have 3 jobs. You do this podcast. You've got a family. How did you find time to write this book, and what prompted you to write it?
So what prompted me to write it, I actually started writing it before October 7th when a dear friend of mine, Mark Baker, passed away from pancreatic cancer. Mark was a huge role model in my life, and I think in the lives of many Australian Jews. He was a professor at Monash University, the head of the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilizations, and the founding president of Shira Chadasha, and he was also involved in many other initiatives, the New Israel Fund, Keshet, which was a precursor to Stand Up, and he really taught me a lot in life about how to hold, how to be a religious Jew and be an atheist in a synagogue, or how to care about Israeli and Palestinian lives in conversations about Israel, and how to hold spaces for multiple differences that I think many people struggle to do. And when he passed away from cancer at such a young age, I thought a lot about the things that he'd taught me, and also I just had a sense of like I wanted to write a book and dedicate it to him, because I wanted it to continue the teachings that I'd learned from him. And so that's really like a week after the Shiva, I started writing this book. Initially, it was not about October 7th. It was more just about stories of my life in Jerusalem and what it's like to be a journalist here and a peace activist and those sorts of things. And then after October 7th, this obviously developed into a book far more about the war and essentially how peace is possible. What do we need to believe? What needs to happen in our education system? What needs to happen around negotiations, gender, religion, all of the obstacles to peace. I deal with each one of them one by one and explain that there's other ways and what they look like. And then I give examples of how they've worked in different countries and also how they've worked here in Jerusalem on a small scale as well through organizations like Kids for Peace, where I work now. So I hope that the book will show people another way is possible, because I think one of the biggest obstacles to peace, in addition to, the very entrenched positions we have, is that you can't imagine an alternative. One of the things I discovered, I looked a lot at other struggles when I was writing the book, and one of them I looked into was the suffragettes. So the suffragettes in 1910, when they were advocating for the rights to women to vote, I was looking at the counter arguments. So in New York, there was an organization called the Anti-Suffragette Movement, and they made a flyer of all the reasons why women shouldn't vote. And one of the top reasons was most women don't even want to vote, which I didn't know. And then they also said women are just going to vote the same as men, which will cancel out the votes. Women might vote for, I don't know, communists, or they'll vote for bad people. Women aren't educated enough to vote, all sorts of stupid reasons. And you look at the flyer now and it looks ridiculous. It looks absolutely ridiculous because women can vote in almost every country on earth now. And all of those arguments, which were the mainstream 100 years ago, are now totally ridiculous. And when I looked at that list, I was like, these are all the reasons why we shouldn't have peace now. And one day someone's going to look at all of these reasons and think that all makes sense to us now, and they're going to look at them and think they're ridiculous. And what I loved about the suffragettes is when they were faced with this list, they were like, they could have just given up. They could have just said, you know what, it's too hard. The male establishment, the patriarchy is too we should just give up on rights to vote. It's never going to happen. But they didn't. They had protests and they wrote petitions, and many of them were arrested, and some of them were even killed in the UK and the US and so many other countries. And now, whilst there is not gender equality in the world, don't get me wrong, the struggle has a long way to go. But look how far it's come because a small group of women believed that another way is possible. And so this book is for the suffragettes of Israel and Palestine. It's for that small group of people that's faced with incredible arguments of why war is the only thing that will free Palestine or secure Israel. And this is I guess, a guide, a comfort, a story to show that another way is possible.
I'm so excited for people to read this book. I hope as many people as possible read it. Is it going to be on audiobook as well?
Yeah, it's going to be on audiobook. I'm going to start recording it next month. And
amazing. So who needs From the Yarra anymore? You can just have in your ears reading your book.
Yeah. And there's also 3 book launches. There's going to be a book launch in Perth with Tess on the 2nd of February. And then there's going to be a book launch in Sydney on the 6th of February, and then one in Melbourne on the 9th of February. The details for all those book launches will be on my new website, which I've just created recently. The URL is ittay.au, ittay.au, very easy URL. So go there. You can now pre-order the book, and surely there'll be links to register for all the book launches. And yeah, would love to see all of our listeners there.
Amazing. And we'll definitely post those dates on our Instagram at fromtheyarra as well as it gets closer to the date. And I'm really happy that while this podcast is ending, the conversation won't. You have so much to give the world and to teach all of us. That was the whole point of starting this podcast in the first place. And even though it's ending, I'm really, really happy that your journey isn't, and your teaching isn't, and your wisdom isn't. And I just can't wait for everyone to read that and to keep learning. And hopefully we get closer to peace by the time your book is published.
As we say in Hebrew, Amen, or in Arabic, Inshallah, may we soon see peace. And thank you to you, Hannah, for all of the conversations we've had on this podcast. It's been a wonderful journey with you over the past year, and to all of our listeners and to the many people who have been comforted and maybe also troubled sometimes by this podcast. We really appreciate it. And for now, farewell, and wishing everyone peace.